So today I'll be going ahead and I'll be showcasing all the blueprints that I have been mainly working on so you can understand everything that I have done and how they work. We'll go ahead and we will access the game instance. How this works is the game instance is op- uh, the game instance allows save data to transfer between scenes. And as you can see, we have data for each player, the team, and of course, the level, game mode, and number of players. This is what's utilized in the main menu. If we go ahead and showcase, we have get access to wins, we have reset wins, and add wins. For now, this isn't really as important for my project as that's hardly used. Now, if we go over to Death Run, we can showcase how that game mode works. Simply put, in Begin Play, it goes ahead and connects to the game instance, and it causes an initialize, which goes ahead and sets up controllers, which will go ahead and it will remove the existence of a local player that is found, and with each number of players selected, it will go ahead and repeat the cycle of creating said player. It will also grab access to the player data from game instance and will then set their data accordingly, and of course add them to their teams, which is based around what you select in the main menu. After that, you go ahead and spawn characters, which is simply put just a system that goes ahead and gets access to all the current players that are to be found, and it will get all of their data and will go ahead and spawn the class that it is assigned to, with, of course, the color scheming and such based around their skin, which I can showcase in a bit. But it will also go ahead and find their team and go ahead to spawn the players at the start locations of the spawns that I place around the map. This goes ahead and ensures that players will be spawned in the correct spots rather than being randomly placed in my scene. Of course, if we go ahead and showcase next, we have this, the bind to game state, which goes ahead and it will link towards the game state change, which is a game state here. In here, we have a simple update state, which goes ahead and it will detect what state we change to, and of course, will update it. Game states is based around setup, pre-game, in-game, and post-game, and this is what is used for Death Run and Timeout to help cause a flow between gameplay. To explain this, we can go ahead and go over here to game state changed, which is linking to the original game state change. This will go ahead and grab access to the game state's enum, which will go ahead and on a switch will do either things. For instance, in pre-game, it will go ahead and after a delay, it will update to in-game. Once in-game, it will go ahead and cause a timer event for time up. For Death Run's case, time is set to an extreme amount to the point that it will never hit the end. However, for the case of timeout, if you were to hit the end of time, it will cause the event for can end game, which is a system that goes ahead and detects either or these booleans, and if any of them are met, it will go ahead and set to post game, which obviously here ends game. which goes ahead and after a delay, it will remove the players and spawn to the main menu again. If we head back up here, we can connect towards the init, which as mentioned, goes ahead and will grab access to the game state base and will disable the inputs of the controllers. This will ensure that during the pre-game setup, none of the players can move around until it is set to in-game. As well as you can press M to quickly go back to the main menu if you wish, as well as how we need to connect over to BPI teams, which will then allow us to grab access to each player's team ID and data for the necessary game modes. If we go over to here, we can grab access to init killed, which is a kill manager that detects how many times each player in each team has been killed. If the death player were to reach its target of 1 death, it will go ahead and set the win to runners. If runners were to hit the target, it will go ahead and set to win for the deaths. I'll explain that further in a moment, but for now I will quickly just go over everything else. For instance, as you noticed there was target kills, but how do you determine target kills? Well, you go ahead and you grab access to the number of players that it is selected, and it will set target kills to that number, but will go ahead and negate it by 1. This allows it so it can detect the amount of players from the runner teams that are present. The game will go ahead and then spawn the track camera, which tracks access to all the players in the scene and will move the camera accordingly by creating a array bound between all of them, and will then grab access to their distance and of course set position to the center of that box, while also scaling zoom based on how far away the players are. You can also adjust the zoom via the min and max camera distance. After a delay, it will go ahead and set the game to pre-game, which will then spawn in the death run widget. This widget is a simple system that goes ahead and sets each data of the amount of players currently in the scene and will enable their assigned widgets to be visible. And once either player's widget has been set to visible, it will go ahead and grab access to their data, from which it will grab their ID, their name, and their team. The name will go ahead and assign itself to the middle one. The tagline of death or runners will go ahead and adjust based around their team ID. And of course, their colors would adjust accordingly based around their game mode. Not game mode, sorry, they'll adjust based around their team. As you can see, there is also this for updating lives. Now, how this works is it will go ahead and detect the amount of players, and based on the amount of players there are, it will go ahead and do the update lives event, which, just for this showcase of player 1, will grab access to that player 1 ID to connect to their character, cast it to their base, grabs access to their lives, and will update the text of lives accordingly. This system also allows it to be repeated if you were to change the value when dying, because initially it would only do it in the start game, and when you die, it wouldn't go ahead and update. If I go to the player, I can quickly showcase my explanation over this. So if the player were to lose a life, it would go ahead and disable its input, while also enabling a ragdoll, and after a duration of a delay, it will negate a life, from which it will go ahead and it will cast towards the death run and cause the update lives event, which is what I showed just then. But if lives, for example, were to reach 0, it will go ahead and kill the player. But if not, then it will keep going ahead and respawning the player by unragdolling, attaching the mesh back to the capsule, and setting its position and teleporting it to checkpoint, which checkpoint is a system that goes ahead and whenever a player walks over the checkpoint, it will assign their checkpoint position to the checkpoint call. And of course, it will enable their input again. However, if, like mentioned, they do die, it will go ahead and it will grab access to their team and call the player killed for that team, which promptly will destroy the actor. And of course, if, for example, you had 2 runners, if both runners died, it will end the game and death would win. A few other minor quick notes to showcase is, as mentioned long before, about the win. In case of death being the winner, it will grab access to their winning team and set the text to blank wins, which would normally just print string. It will also then go ahead and detect for can end game and will add a victory text widget to the viewport. Now, what this is a simple blank text that adjusts itself based around the team and the victor. It will go ahead and it will grab the text of who won, for example. If on the death side, it would set the victor to death wins or runners win. And it will set the team to the team that has won, causing the color to change. And finally, I believe that should be it for Gmod Death Run. If I head on now to the setup again, we can grab access to Game Mode main menu, which is a simple system that goes ahead and grabs access to the game instance once again and causes an initialize, which spawns in the main menu. Now, to explain the main menu is going to take a moment. So how this works is in Construct, it will once again grab access to the game instance, but will also then remove Start. How this works is in the main menu, there is a Start button. However, I don't want the player to be able to just hit the Start button automatically. So I've got this system that hides that button and instead has a text to display either warnings. For instance, we have it so that if you start the game and leave it on just a blank form, which is set via this radial slider, if the game mode was none, it would set the text to please enter a game mode. However, if you go ahead and you do select the different game modes, it will then detect how many number of players it has selected. And for example, in the case of Death Run, it will detect a branch that if you have set the number of players to 1, it will go ahead and cause a warning saying, please enter a higher count. But if you enter higher, it will allow the start button to appear. Now, to go over the radial slider, every time the radial slider will change, it will go ahead and set game mode. Whenever you set the game mode, it auto assigns the map name to the game mode, appending it to underscore map, which would set to map name. It will also go ahead and it would set the hint number of players to 2 and 4 for Death Run, 1 to 4 for timeout, and none for no game mode. If you were to select the different game modes, it would also go ahead and it would grab access to the team selects. For the case of Death Run, if you were to drag the slider to Death Run, it would then clear the options of teams and add Death and Runner as options. Or else, if you go onto Timeout, it would clear and only create no team select. Otherwise, it would just clear the options. The number of players goes ahead and it would set the visibility of each player panel depending on the value you select. And if you don't have any selected, then they will all be hidden, of course. And this here is just a simple quit application with the button press. But to showcase it, I'll go ahead and showcase here by how currently it asks for entering a game mode. If I enter it, it asks for a player count. If I were on Death Run and I select 1, it would ask for a higher count. If I set it to 2, you can see that the different player UI panels start appearing. And for the case of timeout, you can have it set to 1. And also, team select is set to no. Moving down here causes Death and Runner to appear. And if I were to quickly showcase, I can select the skin and name myself. And if I were to give myself a second player, and cause them to be a runner, you can see that it spawns that Death Run widget, which displays their team, names, and lives, and of course sets their color based on their game mode. Now, to quickly go over the final thing with this is the Start Game button. This goes ahead and gets access to the player panels, which if I go ahead and showcase are these. In the player panels, it will go ahead and over here, when you select the team, it will go ahead and ensure that if you do select a team, it would set the is startable bool to true. Otherwise, if it's left blank, it would set to false. Up here above, just a quick mention, is a system that goes ahead and anytime you were to go and finish a game and go back to the main menu, it will grab the data of the players' names and their character selected. The team select does not work anymore because of this new system, so this is kind of redundant to keep. However, if I move back over here, you can see that if each player is startable based around the number of players, if you were to have one player, it will only detect if the one startable player is working. Or else, if the player count is 2 and you go ahead, and if player 1 and player 2 have their startable checked, it would go ahead and allow start game to go through. Otherwise, it will cause a please fill in all sections text to show up on the top left. And of course, this system repeats for each player count. But when you do start game, it calls this function, which goes ahead and sets all of each player's data based around the info that has been selected, and of course connects to the game instance, which saves it across scenes. This also saves the level names, game modes, and number of players that you have selected it to. And once that's done, it will go ahead and set the input back to game and will open the current level and game mode that you select, and of course detects the amount of players you have chose. To explain the final things about the player, we will explain how aiming works. With the enhanced input action of look, we have it set to either the arrow keys or the player's right stick. Based on the value of X and Y of that input, it would set the rotation of the arrow based around the angle that you set with the input. The sprint mechanic is a system that goes ahead, and whenever you hold down the sprint button, which is either a shift or a right trigger, it will detect whether or not the player can increase its stamina, and if it cannot, it will go ahead and allow the player to start running. Once it is start running, it will go ahead and increase the player's speed, which causes a retriggerable delay and uses stamina, which goes ahead and deducts the stamina by 1 until it reaches 0. From that point, if the stamina is 0, it would set is running to false and return the player back to a walking speed. Otherwise, it would just update stamina. Update stamina is to do with this player interface, which is a stamina meter that goes ahead and grabs the player's stamina. And it would map the percentage of the bar based around the min and max value of stamina. If you were to stop running, it will go ahead and cause another type of retriggerable delay, which goes ahead and increases the stamina again. From that point, it adds until the stamina reaches max stamina. From that point, once it reaches max, the player can, of course, begin to run again. This system here is what is used to change the max stamina based around the teams selected. If you were death, you'd have an increased stamina, whereas if you were runners, you'd have a less stamina. This system here is connected to the possess or begin play, which gets access to the controller of the player you control, which goes ahead and assigns its team, and will basically, depending on the team that your player is, it would set lives to either 1 or 3, which connects to that script I mentioned earlier of lose lives. And as far as I know, that should be it to explain the player base. Now, how the team player start works is it goes ahead and it gets access to the player's team, and like I mentioned earlier, connects to the game mode to spawn the players at the locations of these team player starts. The kill volume in the game goes ahead and it will call the lose life event to the player it connects with, which is the event that I mentioned earlier to cause a player's life to go down. The button interaction script goes ahead and detects whether or not the player is colliding with the object, and if it is, it will go ahead and allow the player to input the interact button, as well as enabling pick up and setting the interact key to be visible, which is the E key that floats above the player's head. Otherwise, if you were not on the button, it will go ahead and it will disable the input. However, if you go ahead and you press interact, for the case of the button interaction BP, it will go ahead and allow you in the editor to decide whether or not the button will be used for traps or puzzles. And from that point, if you decide you want it to be used for traps and link to an array of traps that you do, it will then interact for those traps. Otherwise, if you did it for the puzzles, it would do the same for the puzzles. After which, it would set the collision to no collision so you cannot repeatedly press the button. The button end is very similar to the previous button, whereas the difference being how the end works. Instead of being a trap puzzle system, how the end button works is when the runners run into the button at the end, it goes ahead and spawns a kill volume where the death plane is, causing the runners to win because death dies. The pickup base is a script that goes ahead, and when the player is connected to it, it will do the same stuff as the buttons, where it enables a UI and input. However, for the case of the box pickups and dart pickups, whenever you interact with these pickups, it will go ahead and cause a pickup script, which is something that changes with each child class that you can change freely. However, if you drop or throw by either pressing Q or holding Q, or for the case of controller, pressing B or holding B, it will go ahead and detect how long you held it for to determine that, which from that point on, it would either drop or throw. How this works is, for example, the box. With the case of the box, when you pick it up, it will go ahead and cause the pickup to no longer simulate physics and gets rid of the interaction key. From that point, it then sets its collision to no, so you cannot repeatedly press the button, and then attaches the box to the right hand slot socket that you assign to the skeleton of the player base. From that point, if you were to just drop the box, it will go ahead and it will destroy the one you held and spawn a new one at the drop location from holding point, which is the red arrow of player. From that point, if you were to throw the box, it will, instead of destroying it, it will detach the box to away from the player. From that point, it will then simulate physics again and cause an impulse to launch the box at an angle to, of course, throw it. From that point, it resets to do once, which allows it to go ahead and let you pick it up again. For the case of the dart, there's only one real difference, and it's back here. If you were to have this be thrown, which is something that gets set when you do throw it, it will go ahead and detect the balloons. And if it hits the balloon, it will destroy the balloon, which, as shown here, will cause a cold balloon popped event dispatch, and of course destroys the balloon. Now, how this works is back with the system for pickup manager. As mentioned earlier, similar to the kill manager, this system goes ahead and detects how many balloons you have in the scene and also how many you pop. And if it detects that the amount of balloons left equals 0, it will go ahead and teleport one of the puzzle pieces to a location. And back here for the init puzzle, for this I will go over to the timeout game mode. Most of this is entirely similar to Death Run, however the changes mainly have to do with init puzzle instead of init kill. Init puzzle goes ahead and spawns the pickup manager and of course detects for balloons and the puzzle. And if you were to have these events called, it will go ahead and grab access to all of the current spawn locations of the puzzle pieces. From that point, it will spawn puzzle pieces to those locations. And at that point, it will go ahead and it will connect to a pick up script. And when you pick up the script, it will go ahead and it will negate one from puzzles remaining. And if there are no more puzzles remaining, it will cause the win to happen. The shelf is a simple thing that connects to the button interaction. And when it has interacted, because this is a child class, like many of these are, it will cause a timeline to play, which is a simple, just one-way path to open the shelf, and of course, adds the actor local offset to said direction. The puzzle pieces, as explained earlier, is a system that goes ahead and when the player interacts with them, it will call the pickup collect and destroys them, which does what I mentioned earlier. The puzzle piece spawner is placed around the stages of the timeout game mode and of course spawns the puzzle pieces there. And with the BP puzzle, this system goes ahead and it connects to the interaction system from the button interact, and this gets copied into child classes, which is what the previous puzzles have been. The traps are similar to the puzzle where it goes ahead and grabs access to the interact for the buttons and is basically used by creating children for each of these traps. For example, the saw blades, which is a system that goes ahead and it will cause a animation timeline for the blades to move out. And of course, after a delay, it will go ahead and move the blade back to the start position. And if the blade goes ahead and hits the player, they will lose a life. The darts goes ahead and it will spawn a projectile, which the projectile is a simple system that has a projectile movement component and when hits the player will destroy. The risky platform trap is a trap that does not get controlled via a input. Instead, it is placed around the stage, and in the editor, you can choose whether or not you want that platform to be risky or not. In which, if it is set to risky, when the player touches the risky platform, that platform will go ahead and deactivate, hide itself so that you fall through. Otherwise, if you don't set it to risky, that platform does nothing. The choice platform, however, is a system that connects to the button, and whichever one you go ahead and select, you have two ways of doing it. You can either keep the keep platform on or off, and if you keep platform on, the button you press is the one that stays. So for example, if you had 3 of these in a row and you want the middle one to stay, you set that one to yes. When you press the button, that one stays and the other go away. Otherwise, if you set this to no, it will of course just hide them. The bridge trap is pretty similar, except it is just one platform that goes ahead and hides itself, and instead of just hiding itself forever, will of course come back. The caged bomb trap goes ahead and spawns in this caged wall around this bomb, which from that point, if the from that point the player will be trapped, and if you are trapped, it will then spawn an explosion, which goes ahead, and if the player touches the collision, will die. And another thing about it is that the explosion is a fractured geometry that allows the bomb to split into pieces, and of course causes an impulse which launches them. Once that's done, it will also cause a Niagara effect to activate and play a sound. Once that is done, it will then go ahead and destroy the component and then the actor. The Spikes non-interact script is a version of the Spikes that goes ahead, and if the player touches it, they will lose a life. Whereas the interact one is a system where these spikes are hidden underneath a surface, and once you interact will cause an animation to play to rise them up. Once the spikes have risen, of course, they become a dangerous trap for the players to run into. And finally, the trampoline trap, a system that, while I do wish I could do the way I intended, for now, the trampoline, when you interact, goes ahead and sets the trampoline to hidden and instead showcases these spikes, which are just the actor components from the non-interact spikes. And of course, after a duration of time has happened, it will then hide the spikes and then set the trampoline to show again. I believe that should be very much it for explaining all my mechanics. I do apologize, this is a long video, but this is necessary for me to explain how everything works. And that will be all for this video.